September 15, 1944, Peleliu Island, Western Pacific. The dawn light had barely begun to lift when the first American 105mm howitzer shells tore through the humid air, their shrieking descent slicing across the limestone ridges of Brogel. The jungle canopies shivered with every concussion. Dust, coral fragments, and shredded palm fronds vibrated in the drifting smoke. Japanese defenders, concealed in caves they believed impervious, felt the earth tremble beneath them. The sound, the deep rolling thunder of the 105mm guns, became the symbol of the day, a relentless reminder that the battlefield had changed. Hours before, the island had rested in a deceptive calm. Japanese troops, veterans of multiple campaigns, crouched behind their fortified cave mouths, confident that their extensive tunnel systems would resist American bombardment. They expected the usual pattern: a naval barrage, heavy but brief, then a ground assault, predictable and linear. But the orchestration of American artillery on Peleliu was unlike anything they had endured in China, New Guinea, or the Solomons. The 105mm howitzer, delivered in disciplined volleys from Marine Corps artillery regiments landing behind the assault waves, split the ground with a precision that stunned even seasoned observers. To understand why the shock ran so deep, one must step back into the strategic logic of the Pacific War. Japan's defense doctrine for Peleliu centered around the Brogel Ridge, a labyrinth of ravines, hollows, and coral spines drilled with firing chambers. The Japanese commander, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, intended to prolong the battle by drawing the Americans into a brutal war of attrition among the rocks. His men believed their positions were nearly invincible. Reinforced limestone, interlocking tunnels, and well-stocked caches gave them a powerful sense of assurance. They had survived countless naval barrages before. They expected the same again. But the Americans arrived with a new tempo. The 105mm howitzer, transportable, accurate, and engineered for continuous fire, became the instrument that shattered those expectations. In Marine after-action logs, the term rolling fire curtain appears repeatedly. Batteries synchronized their shots, lifting and shifting every few minutes to maintain pressure without halting the infantry advance. When one battery paused to adjust range, another stepped in seamlessly. To the Japanese inside the ridges, it felt like the island itself had become a living drum, beaten without mercy. Japanese diaries recovered after the battle reveal the emotional contrast with stark clarity. One soldier wrote, "The ground shook like a living beast. Every moment we waited for the cave to collapse." Another recorded bewilderment that American guns continued firing even as Marines pushed inland, something they rarely saw from slower, more rigid pre-war tactics. They expected pauses. Instead, they experienced continuity. The symbolism of the 105mm's deep thunder grew heavier with every hour. The sound traveled through coral, resonated through tunnels, and echoed down slopes. It became the embodiment of American logistical power, an audible signature of an army that could deliver ammunition across thousands of miles of ocean without hesitation. For Japanese units struggling under blockade conditions, each blast reminded them of a difference more profound than tactics alone. It reminded them of supply. Historical evidence supports this widening gap. U.S. records show that during the first days of the Peleliu assault, certain Marine batteries expended over 1,500 rounds per day. Ammunition ships offshore kept the flow constant. At a time when many Japanese regiments across the Pacific rationed shells to single digits per day, such volume felt surreal. The defenders at Peleliu assumed American guns would slow by nightfall, but the 105s continued methodically, firing illumination rounds, marking targets, and suppressing counterattacks. The thunder never truly stopped. This difference shaped perception more than casualties alone. The Japanese had long considered themselves masters of endurance, believing spiritual strength could compensate for material disparity. But on Peleliu, that belief began to crack. The Americans were not relying on spiritual force. They were relying on overwhelming industrial coordination, turning firepower into a physical environment rather than an event. The Japanese defenders, once confident in their tunnel systems, began describing them as stone prisons under the unending howitzer rhythm. One of the most documented moments of stunned disbelief occurred on the second day of the battle. A concealed Japanese strongpoint on the ridge unleashed a sudden volley of machine gun fire, expecting it to disrupt the American advance. Within minutes, U.S. forward observers triangulated the flashes, relayed coordinates, and brought down a concentrated 105mm barrage that sealed the position under layers of coral debris. Surviving defenders wrote later that they never imagined such rapid counterfire was possible. Their world had been shaped by slower, less integrated command systems. The transformation deepened through the week. As American infantry pushed into the jagged terrain, the 105s followed them closely, shifting positions, setting up on captured ground, and maintaining pressure on every cave mouth the Marines identified. The Japanese soldiers, who once believed artillery barrages were temporary preludes, now realized they were living within a continuous cycle of shock and suffocation. Hope narrowed. Their commanders, once proud of their defensive engineering, confronted the reality that even the strongest fortress could be worn down by an enemy whose guns never tired. And beneath all this, the symbolic thunder persisted. For the Americans, it was the sound of method, of discipline, coordination, and supply. For the Japanese, it became the sound of inevitability. One Marine leader described the echo across the ridges as the heartbeat of the island. And indeed, it pulsed through every decision, every advance, every moment someone lifted their head above the coral. By the time the surviving Japanese troops retreated deeper into the labyrinth, the shock had become resignation. The 105mm barrages had redefined their understanding of enemy strength. This was not merely bombardment, it was the expression of a national industrial engine moving through the Pacific, transporting its will across oceans with ships, cranes, trucks, and endless ammunition crates. It was war as a system, not merely an assault. As the battle wore on into October, the roar of the 105s slowly faded, replaced by the eerie quiet of a shattered ridge. Smoke drifted from collapsed caves. Fragments of coral glittered in the sunlight. The sound that had defined the struggle, the deep rolling thunder of American guns, echoed only in memory. But for those who survived, it carried a lesson that extended beyond tactics or terrain. In the end, the Japanese troops were not merely stunned by the barrages, they were confronted with a truth larger than the battlefield: that the ability of a democratic nation to mobilize its people and industry could overpower even the most determined defenders. The 105mm howitzer, with its steady and disciplined voice, spoke of a society that believed in collective strength, one that could forge victory not through individual heroism alone, but through unity, production, and resolve. And so, the thunder of Peleliu became more than a battlefield memory. It became a symbol of how freedom expressed itself in steel and supply, echoing through the ridges long after the guns fell silent, reminding the world that the power of a free people when focused toward a single purpose can shake even the strongest fortress to its core.